Cloud. Okay, welcome back, everybody. So we have a lot to cover in Yeshayahu. By the way, I highly suggest the recordings. Alex Israel's parak by parak is very good. The class that Neri Klein gave for an Israeli program is just tremendous. He's my neighbor and buddy. He's just amazing, Neria. It's a shame he doesn't know English. I mean, he knows a little bit of English, but it's a shame he doesn't speak in English. But his stuff is amazing. I'm going to try to share with you just a couple of things of my own. We can't cover the whole book, in 45 minutes a week. I'll just share a couple insights on my own today. And I'm going to share with you first a little outline, just so you have an idea what's going on in the book. Here we are. This is pretty basic. Chapter 1 was the intro, remember? And we talked about that. We gave the first share of that, I think, last week about the key theme of the book, the time period of Chizkiyahu, and how the Navi has to explain how things can be so bad, even though we're so frum. That was our main topic for last week or two. Now, chapter 2 through 5 it could have been what we call Yemot HaMashiach in the time of Chizkiyahu. Things were so good in the time of Chizkiyahu, it could have been Achrit HaYamim, but we had to take that prosperity and use it properly. Instead, we became highly obnoxious, God got disappointed, and that leads to the Shekhinah leaving in chapter 6. It's not Yeshayahu being appointed, but God being disappointed, and Yeshayahu sees the Shekhinah leaving, and Yeshayahu's job is he has to tell the people why it's happening. He's giving his job to rebuke the people, to explain to them that he tried first to get them to do better, but now his main job is to explain why God's allowing Ashur to come and wipe them out. Then chapters 7 through 12 explain how that happens. How Achaz is given a chance and he just goes against God, and Chizkiyahu tries his best, but nonetheless things go bad. But the main topic there is the rise of Ashur, and it ends with Ashur finally falling, and the Choter Miges Yishai, that little sprout coming out of the cut down trunk of from the house of David, will hopefully start the growth of the kingdom again. That was the end of chapter 12, and Menachem Mashiach doing Tzedek Mishpat. We talked about the whole theme of Tzedek Mishpat last week. That's the underlying theme behind Yechezkel's rebuke, and explaining why, even though they prayed, etc., because the Sadi wasn't doing Tzedek Mishpat, God allowed Ashur to take over anyhow. That was chapters 1 through 12. That's classic Isaiah. Chapters 13 through 23, we're going to focus on now for a minute. What ties the whole unit together is the word Masa. I think you caught on to that if you've been looking through the Prakim. And from chapter 24 to 35, I think what ties it together, there's one Masa in the middle there, but a lot of hoys, I'm sure you noticed, like a woes, a lot of good things, a lot of bad things, but boy, is it poetic. I'm only going to pull out the poetry behind it. It's really complicated, Prakim, hard to understand them, but just beautiful poetry. Now, we're going to focus today primarily on this section because it's easiest to understand, because it's like Sefer Malachim, but why it's here. Why do we have 4 chapters from Sefer Malachim in the middle of the book? And how that'll be the transition to the last section of the book, which we're going to start today, because it'll be the material for this week. It'll be our main topic for next week, what they call Deutero Isaiah, and the reason for the argument and what that's about. Okay, that was my little introduction. I'm hoping that gives you a bit of an overview of what the book is like and what the book's about. I want to talk about the word Masa. So let's take a look I'm going to use Yirmiyahu to explain it. Let me share my screen and open up the Navi. I just want to show you, again, without understanding anything in the Prakim, just, where is no, not that. Here we are, this one. Okay, I need Isaiah, chapter, here we are. Okay, so the end of Parak Yud Bet. Remember, Parak Yud Aleph was V'yetzra Choter Migezi Yishai, and Ruach Hashem, Ruach Chochmah Bina, Ruach Yitzhak Gvura, will become Melech HaMashiach, Birat Hashem, and he'll bring the Geula, remember? He'll have a Tzedek and Mishpat, etc., and everything will be good, and then ends with Parak Yud Bet, with the famous Havdalah Psukim in Sali Veroni Yoshevet Tzion, Higadol B'Kirbech, and referring to a final Geula, which will happen ultimately in the time of Chizkiyahu. Now, that was last week's unit. Parak Yud Gimel, just notice, Parak Yud is Masa Bavel. Is it Bavel or Ashur? I think you might have had a share on that, but just I'm paying the word Masa. It's a Masa about the fall or the punishment of other nations. Begin with Bavel. The next Masa is going to be, we go to the Middle East, um, after Bavel, but by this ends, it's a Masad ben Bavel, but at the end of it, there's always something good for Israel. There's something to fall of other nations, and Kirachem Hashem et Yaakov v'char od b'Yisrael v'nichem ad matam. There's a Masad, how bad things, how other nations will be punished, and Israel will be saved. Keep this pattern in mind. So there'll be a Masad followed by some type of gula for us. Okay? Like Nishba Shem Tzvot Lemor Imgo Kasher Dimiti Ken Hayta Kasher Yatzim Takum Lishbor Ashur Bartzi Ba'Hari Avusena. In other words, Ashur will be defeated finally in the land, and we're going to finally defeat him. Okay, and his yoke will be taken off our throat. Now, Perek Vav is going to be Masa Moav. Okay, how the fall of Moav, what's going to happen to them, and why they deserve to be punished. That's Perek Vav. Perek Zayin is going to be, that was the word about Moav, and now it's going to happen in 3 years' time. But that's Neri kind of gave a beautiful share on this on the time period. If you want to listen to the Hebrew, Hebrew's easy to understand. I suggest it's on the Israeli program, but I suggest listening. Okay. Then we have Masad Mesek. Got it? And then, but in light of that, something good happened to Yaakov. Yemahu Yidal Kvod Yaakov. Okay, goes on, and then what's next? There's another Masan Perik Yudchet. It's going to be we'll talk about Ersat Farm later on, but again with a good ending. Beite Yuval Shai Hashem Tzvot Ad Mushak Murat Miam Nora Minahu Vahala. Again, something good for us and something bad for them. Perik Yutet Masa Mitzrayim. They get a lot of press because they're our big enemy, because they sort of abandoned us. And then finally, something good. Bayomahu Chamesh Arim Be'eretz Mitzrayim Midabrot Tzfat Kanan V'Yishbot L'Hashem Tzvot. Egypt will be punished, but then somehow they'll turn and serve God. Okay, and there'll be a Mizbeach for Hashem in the land of Egypt. This is really strange. If you know the beginning of Beit Sheni, there's a Mikdash Chonyo in Egypt. That's a topic for a Second Temple history. But look at the end of it. On that day, there'll be a Mesilah from Mitzrayim and Ashur Mitzrayim, and they're going to come. They'll come with each other, and Israel will be the tie between Mitzrayim and Ashur, and there'll be a blessing. I think that's an ultimate fulfillment of Brit Ben Abtarim, where our borders are from Nahar Mitzrayim to Nahar Prat, but basically we're located between the two centers of civilization, and we're going to have a good influence on all of them. But this is, again, it has a good messianic, ideal ending. After the punishment of the enemy, Perachaf will be another. That's what do you call it? That's the story with Tartan. Perachaf Aleph should be the next Masah. Masah Bid Baryam, and then Masah Ba'arav, and the next one. Those are again different countries. In the middle of this, we have Masah Gei Chizayon, which is all about Yerushalayim. But we have all these Masot about the fall of all these other nations, and then Yerushalayim is called Gei Chizayon, and it's going to talk about the fall of Yerushalayim and why. We'll have time. We'll get back to that. And remember this guy Shevna, who'll come up in a story later on, who's a little bit too haughty. Now, in Perach Gimel, Masatzor, and I think that's the last of the Masaot. Because Perach Daled, we start our I call poetic, I say, that's just without translating word. Hini Hashem bokeh ka'aretz uvolka, viva faneh ve'fitz yoshvea, ba'im k'kohen kever adonav, k'shivcha k'virta, k'konek k'mocher, k'malveh k'loveh, k'noshe, k'asher noshad bo. See, he bok tibo ka'aretz, bibos tibos. You see the poetry? That continues for the next 10, 15 chapters. Really hard to understand, but it's just beautiful poetry. Now, I want to go back to, then again, there's all this poetic section from here till chapter 35. A lot of good things, a lot of rebuke, a topic in itself. I want to focus today on the word Masa. Now, the pattern I try to show you is whenever there's a Masa, it's God punishing another nation for their bad deeds and something good about Am Yisrael at the end of it. That was pretty much the pattern. There's those Masot. In Sefer Yirmiyahu, he's going to refer to these Masot, but Yirmiyahu is going to be complaining about the false prophets who are misleading the people, promising them victory when they're not deserving of victory. Now, if you know the time period of Yirmiyahu, which will be the next topic in, Shnayim, will be about a couple of weeks from now, in Sefer Yirmiyahu, Yirmiyahu's big message is that God is allowing Bavel to take over. It'll be very similar because now God's allowing Ashur to take over. Some 100 years later, God's allowing Bavel to take over, not just Israel, but the whole Middle East. Israel is going to have to accept their sovereignty. And the false prophets are telling the people, in God's name, that everything will be fine. It's okay to rebel against Bavel. You'll survive, you'll win. And don't give in to Bavel, don't accept their conquest, fight them. And they're misleading the people, thinking God will help them. You realize He won't help them. But because of these Nevi'im, I'll just call them rabbis for the sake of to make it understand what's going on. They're God's prophets who are guiding the people on how to serve God, but the rabbinical leaders are promising the people military victory when they're not deserving of it, promising things in God's name that God never promised. Instead of telling the people how they need to behave, he's telling people what they want to hear, not what they need to hear. Now, keep that in mind. We'll see why. We're going to take 10 minutes now and go into Yirmiyahu 23, listen to his rant on the other prophets, how these false prophets, again, they're not prophets of other gods, they're prophets of our God, but misleading the people with their dreams, saying things that God never said because they're so sure that they're right. So we're going to open up now, not this one, Yirmiyahu chapter 23. He starts with woe to the shepherds who are causing the people. He's referring to the bad leaders who are leading the people astray and what's going to happen to them. And then I'm going to make new leaders, he says. And then this is in the theme of Isaiah. Remember, he's generation later, 2 generations later, but he's giving the same theme. This makes it Tishman Esrei. This is the Tzemach David. Is built on this. A time is coming when I'll bring a leader from the house of David who will be a shoot of righteousness, okay? And he'll be a king, understanding God, and he'll do mishpat and tzedakah on the land. When he does that, during that time period, Judah will be saved, Yisrael will dwell quietly, and the name of this king will be Hashem Tzidkenu. Or later, that's what Tzidkenu should have been. It wasn't. Again, that's a theme for Yirmiyahu. Okay? And therefore, it'll be so great at that time, people talk about our future redemption will be greater than our original redemption coming from Egypt. Okay. Then, in light of this, he says that's what can be in the future. In the meantime, the Nevi'im is breaking his heart. He says, why? Because they're like drunken people. They're they're ruining what's happening. He's calling them. He's calling in their work as prophets. They're adultering, meaning they're misrepresenting God. Okay. And again, he's talking about how the Navi and the Kohen, they're all rooting things for me. They're making my house, they're founding my house, their behavior is terrible, and they're misleading the people. Okay. Now, also the Nevi'im of Shomron, he's complaining about them, and this is from beforehand, we'll see. This probably the Nevi'im from the time of Yeshayahu who were promising Shomron the same fate, that things would be good, and they misled the people. And in the same way, the Nevi'im promising the saving of Yerushalayim, they're also full of corruption. Okay, and they're strengthening the hands of evildoers, giving them support, even though their behavior is like Sodom and Amorah. You see all these things from Yeshayahu that Yirmiyahu is repeating. It's very similar to Yeshayahu Perek Aleph. Now, so he goes on and on about how bad these Nevi'im are. He gives his little prayer. Okay, it goes like this. Here. I heard what these Nevi'im are saying, but he says they're just dreaming. Okay? These Nevi'im are misleading my people. They're saying what they're dreaming is saying what their dreams are. They're saying God actually told them. They're causing my people to forget my name with their dreams. Okay? And if a Navi has a dream, and if a Navi thinks that's what he wants, that's what he thinks it should be, let him say it's a chalom. But don't say it's the word of God, if it's not really the true word of God. And he goes on, to explain why these Nevi'im are bad. Therefore, he says, these Nevi'im, they're stealing my words, okay, and one from each other. And therefore, God's saying, I'm going to punish all these Nevi'im. There's Nevi'ei Sheker, they're false dreams, etc. They're misleading my people. They're causing them to fight Bavel and lose the battle because God said Bavel is going to defeat them. Okay? I didn't send them. I didn't command them. and they're not helping my people at all. Now listen carefully. What are these Nevim saying? Here's what we need for today. V'chi shalcha amazeh o hanavi o hakohen lemor ma masa. When the people asking the prophets, remember the prophets are telling the people what the people want to hear, not what the people need to hear. Because the problem in the time of Yirmiyahu, the people are following the false prophets who are promising them in God's name that we can defeat Bavel. And God's saying the opposite. But they're saying what the people want to hear, not what they need to hear. So when the people ask the prophet, they want to hear a masa. What's a masa? A masa is a rant by the Navi on another nation. Right? And a masa is like this heavy words of destruction coming on our enemies. So the people just want to hear from the rabbis or from their prophets, from their religious guidance people. They want to hear how God's going to defeat their enemies. We want to hear our enemies falling. Okay? Okay? It says, "Vanavi v'kohen ba'am asher yomar masa Hashem upakati al yishahu ababito." If a Navi is going to say another masa, I'm going to punish him. Okay? What's happening? The Navim are saying things about what's going to happen to Israel's enemies. They'll say Bavel's going to fall. Anyone who's fighting us, who's joining Bavel in their attack against Israel, the people want the Navi to predict the fall of our enemy, and they're misleading the people because God wants them to give in to Bavel. And therefore the people want to hear Masa'ot. What did the rabbis say today? Everyone wants to hear the good news. You won't hear this anymore. Because the Masa is only what each person is saying. God's a real God, and you're turning God's words around and misquoting God, misrepresenting God, promising people things that God never said. Okay, and when the Navi says, and what God's answers, what did God say? If a Navi says Imasa Hashem Tomeru, if the Navi says a Masa, means if a Navi will talk about the fall of our enemy, I'm telling you, don't say that again. And if a Navi says it, don't believe him. And because you're doing that, this is this wordplay. I'm gonna what's it say? I'm gonna tear you away and cast you off. In a nutshell, what do you see from Yirmiyahu? That's why we want to do this. I hope it's clear. What the people want to hear from their prophets is prophecies of the doom of their enemies. The prophets are talking a lot, but the prophets are saying what the people want to hear, and that makes them popular. And there's so many false prophets in this time period because everyone is just itching for Bavel to fall, because Bavel already took over the country and continues and we want Bavel to fall. And we want our king back. We want our we're hoping the worst is over. We can't believe the temple will actually be destroyed. Yirmiyahu is saying, give in to Bavel. All the other prophets are saying, don't give in, fight them, and God will help us. And that's going to mislead the people. The people want to hear a Masa. What's a Masa? We have many of them from the time of Yeshayahu. Masa'ot, or how God's going to punish our enemies. And all the people want to hear from the Nevim are Masa'ot. And Yirmiyahu is saying, no more Masa'ot, that's it. Those days are over. Now the Masa will be on you. Now I just did that to show you Yeshayahu is promising ultimate redemption from our enemies, but first we're going to get punished really hard first. Okay? Now, again, what Arlene is saying, what Yeshayahu was saying is, put your trust in God, and God will save you from Ashur, again, if you behave properly. But Yeshayahu is still talking about our enemies being punished, and God saving us, and that can happen if we're worthy. So he's going to give rebuke of making ourselves worthy, and then promising God will defeat our enemies. Yirmiyahu is different because in the time of Yirmiyahu, it's a lost cause already. Bavel's taking over, there's nothing they can do about it. And when God said, Bavel's taking over, and when the false prophets saying, no, Bavel's going to fall, that's what get God so angry, because they're saying it in God's name. I'm just using it to show you that people are used to hearing Masa'ot because that's what they want to hear. Now, it's okay to hear a Masah, God's going to punish your enemy, if it comes with, God will save you if you're worthy. And therefore, the other half of Yeshayahu's Nevuot, and especially in the Hoys, he's going to talk to us what we need to be doing. We'll bring some examples in a minute. Now, in the middle of all these Masot of Yeshayahu against the other nations, he includes in a hint, he puts us into the list of the nations by calling Gei Chizayon. He's talking about the fall, how Ashur is going to punish all these enemies, and he throws Israel in a backhanded way into this unit. Now that's going to be chapter. Where are we? That's going to be chapter 22 in Isaiah. Where are we? Yeshayahu, chapter 22. Here we go. Masagi Chizayon, and now we have a peek into what's happening in Yerushalayim, of how the people are so haughty and just waiting to win a victory and not changing their ways. Okay, it's an ir homiyah kiryah liza chalalayich lo chalecher v'lo metei mechama kol ksiach nedu yachad mikeshet usaro. Okay, basically everyone is what do you call it? It's just a party town. Okay, he goes, what's going to happen? Ki yom muhumam v'sam v'uchal l'Adonai Shem Tzvot gibbechi chezyon mekarkarkir. Okay. Basically, it'll be a terrible day happening to Yerushalayim, and they're all gonna, what do you call it? All their quivers will have their arrows. Basically, Jerusalem's gonna be, there'll be an attack on the city. There'll be chariots all surrounding it, etc. And then what's gonna happen? What did you do to protect yourself? This is famous. This is we see this in archaeology. You took the breaches in the wall of the city of David, okay? And you did this was Chizkiyahu's Tanu. You brought the water from the brecha, from the lower brecha, and you brought it underground. This is the allusion to Chizkiyahu's Tanu that we see in archaeology. That's they built during the time of Chizkiyahu to save them from Ashur, so Ashur shouldn't find the water. But you basically took over people's houses, torn them down to take the building blocks to build the wall. Basically, you did all these big engineering events and building. How Jerusalem was built up under Chizkiyahu to protect them, I'm sure, was simply a tremendous effort of construction. But what didn't you do? This is a beautiful wordplay. If you know the Brechat Shiloach area, the Shiloach brings the water from the Gichon spring, which is in the valley, and brings it inside the city. And then when the water comes out inside the wall of the city, it turns into what's called the Shiloach bowl. Right? You made a basin of water between the walls of Yerushalayim, the walls of your David, and the upper city. That's where the Shiloh comes out. But that's wordplay, bikva meloshin tikva. You put all your hope in that building project. The mea brechai shana, you took the water from the old pool and brought it to the new pool between the walls. That's the Shiloh pool at the end of Chizkiyahu's Tanu. But what didn't you do? All you cared about was your building projects, and you didn't look for God. Okay? And therefore, God's going to call all this punishment coming on Yerushalayim and Yehudah. And instead of Sason and Simcha, there'll be Harog, Bakar, V'shchotzon. Everyone's partying before the war. Everyone's having a party. Let's eat and drink because tomorrow we're going to die. And then God says, I hear what's going on in the city, and this sin cannot be forgiven until you're all going to die. Okay? And then he complains about Shebna the Sefer. We'll see about him later on. He's building himself a big kever in Yerushalayim, and he's going to punish him as well. But basically, the Navi is complaining about the haughtiness again of Yerushalayim. They're putting all their hope on their strength and not putting their hope with God. But again, with all that strength in the building, at the same time, they're getting all these messages from their false prophets of things will be good for them. And the Navi is saying here that just like all the nations will be punished by Ashur, you'll be punished as well. Now, in light of that, there'll be one more Masah in 23. Masatzor. Okay, and then we get the poetic part of Isaiah, and I'm going to bring a couple examples of there's tons of musar here and rebuke as well about impending punishment, but also what we need to do for things to be better. I'll bring one from I think 33 was a good one. Give me a second. No, not that one. We'll get 34 or 35. 1 second. I got the wrong one. 35 is the end. 30. He complains about Egypt. Not that one either. Maybe it's 28. 1 second. Let's just read the end one then. We'll get to the last paragraph in 35. But that's it. Okay. Yeah, the last line of this whole unit is that's a famous song. But that ends this whole unit to be ultimate redemption after and he gives strength for the weak hands. What do you call it? And don't be afraid, God will come redeem you. And then the eyes of the blind will be opened up, and people will finally see God when they see his Yeshua. There was one other thing I wanted to show you, but not important for now. One more paragraph. I'll try one more and then we'll give up. Oh yeah. But Yeshayahu comments out people going to Egypt for help. Because Ashur's coming in, they're hoping Egypt's going to help them. So there's woe hayurdim mitzrayim lezral susim mishainu v'yiptucha recha kemra v'aparshim kesmum od v'shag toshisav v'hashem dorashu. One of the key themes all through Yeshayahu is don't put your hope in alliances with Egypt. Okay? Mitzrayim adam below el v'seim basar below ruach v'Hashem yater yadav v'chashav ozer v'nafal uzur v'yachtav kulam yichluyun. This biggest problem is we're always looking for foreign powers to help us. Yeshayahu is saying all the time, be neutral. Don't put your trust in God, and don't make alliances with evil people, with Egypt. Okay. He says, because God will protect you. He will protect you, Shalom, and then finally people can get Ashur is going to fall, not in natural ways. God's going to come and destroy Ashur in the miraculous way, and that's the story we're going to read about now. Anyway, this whole section ends with a section from Sefer Melachim. Okay? And this is a story how finally, after all these promises, we're finally going to defeat Ashur. After they wipe out Lachish and after they wipe out all the cities of Yehuda, Yerushalayim is saved at the last minute. And we're going to read one story about the siege on Lachish right before the siege on Yerushalayim. And I want to use this to explain the idea of Bamot. And this will be the background to understand what's going to be in the next section. Okay, the 14th year of Chizkiel, it's after the 10 tribes have fallen, after all the big cities are taken. Sancheriv comes on ashore on Arei du Absur Beit Basem. He takes all the walled cities and the fortified cities of Yehuda, including Lachish, which was the big city, and he's planning now to take over Yerushalayim as well. וישלח מלך אשור את רבשקי מלכיש ירושלים המלך חזקיהו בחיל כבד ויעמוד בתעלת הברכה העליונה בשאת כבש. Okay, he comes outside the wall of the city. He's giving a speech to the people. Remember, the people put this big defense on the city. Rav Shekeh is going to come and try to get the people to surrender. Okay. So before he gives a speech, Eliakim ben Chilkiel, who was like the big guy running the country, the Sarapnim or the Sar Bitachon, whoever, he was the man in charge of the king's house, and Shebna the Sofer, these names, the Maskir, the Sofer, and Asher Labait, we find in Alter Beit Rishon. Those are the three big important people working with the king. That's his cabinet. So Rav Shekeh says to them, go tell your boss, Imru Nel Chizkiel, Komar Melech Ashur, Melech Agdol Melech Ashur, Ma Bita Maser Shabbatachta. Rav Shekeh is going to give them a shir klali why it pays to surrender. Listen to the three tanot he's going to give. Notice Rav Shekeh, the representative of the Assyrian power, of the Assyrian army, trying to negotiate a surrender of Yerushalayim before the Assyrian army comes to take it over. He's going to give the political leaders three reasons why they should surrender. Okay? He says as follows. Okay? He says, we're coming with what do you call it? With Gvura, you think you're strong to go to war. Ata ami patachta ami martabi. Why are you rebelling against Ashur? Who are you putting your trust on? He's going to give three possibilities of who they might be trusting, and then Shlagdam, he's going to sort of say why each one is impossible. Okay. So one possibility is Egypt. You're putting your hope that Egypt's going to come and help you. Egypt ain't going to help anybody. They make big promises. They're not going to help. Everyone's putting their trust in Egypt coming to help you. Okay. And what's going to happen? He's going to be like what's called a kanero tooth. He's going to, like someone leaning on a cane or on a stick, a support stick that's hollow. The second it looks like it's supporting you. The second you lean on it, it breaks. Okay? As people put their trust in Egypt, ain't going to come and help. You think Hashem, your God, is going to help you? There's no way your God. There's no way your God could help you. Why? Because your king is the worst king in the eyes of God. Why? Why wouldn't God help you? Because your king Chizkiel destroyed all the Shtiblach. You see what he's saying? He's saying the most sacrilegious thing that Chizkiel did, he got rid of the Bamot, which are Bamot to God. He's saying, why would God help you? Your king destroyed all the places of worship of Yudke Vavke. And then he said, third thing, you put your hope on your army. He says, I'll make a wager with you. I'll give you 2,000 horses. You don't have who to ride them. Even if you have arms and horses, you have no horsemen who can ride them and fight with them. Why are you putting your hope on Egypt and on getting arms from Egypt and chariots and horses? Okay, and why do you think that Hashem is going to help you? Okay, and if it's up to Hashem, Hashem is on my team. If it wasn't God on my team, I wouldn't have been so successful up until now. Now, what I want to point out here, what's he saying? Everyone knows that Chizkiel went on and wiped out all the Bamot. The first king to wipe out the Bamot, that was Chizkiel. We did in Sefer Menachem, I hope you saw that. Every other king, even the good kings, Bracha Bamot Lo Saru. The first king to get rid of all the Bamot was Chizkiel, but Bamot was Avodat Hashem, it's just not in Yerushalayim. And it was accepted. It wasn't ideal, but they didn't pass it. The Rambam hold it was Asr, but everyone kept it. Bamot is like Shtiblach. It's Avodat Hashem, but not the ideal way. But the people going there are sure that they're right. If Chizkiel closed down all the Bamot, that's the most sacrilegious thing he could do. So what's an outsider saying to us? How could God help your king Chizkiel? Chizkiel got rid of all the Bamot. What's that proof to us? That everyone saw Bamot as Avodat Hashem. Now, what's so important about this? Yeshayahu is saying, why is God angry with his people? Because of lack of tzedek and mishpat. That's why God allowed Ashur to come in. And what are the people thinking? And you see that's what Rav Shekeh is thinking. God's not helping his people because Chizkiel got rid of all the Bamot. But you see why everyone's so confused all the time. But I'm making a big deal about it because everyone thinks Bamot is idol worship. It's not idol worship. It's serving the right God the wrong way. But what brings people to Bamot? Because they're in consumer mode, because God's working for them. That's this underlying theme through all Nevi'im Achronim. I'm trying to show you. People, when they turn to God, they believe in their God, but He's the God of war. Hashem Tzvot, Hashem Ish Melchama, Hashem Shmo. They come to the temple and they pray on the high places. That's what the northern tribes tried in Yehuda. Everyone's turning to God, help us defeat the Assyrians, later the Babylonians. And they're praying to God, saying, I'm bringing you korbanot, I'm giving prayers, I want you to save me. And they want God to answer. The Navi is saying, that's not enough. You have to fix your ways, fix your society. The people don't buy it. And when God doesn't answer their prayers, then they start turning to other gods. But Chizkiel tried to get rid of these Bamot because they were wrong. But the people didn't understand that. And then, in their eyes, what's happening? The reason we're losing Tashur is because we destroyed his Bamot. And that's what Rav Shekeh is saying. But you can see from reading between the lines, he's what's called Mesiach Lefi Tumo, Rav Shekeh. That's how the Goyim view what Chizkiel did. And I'm sure the Jews viewed it in a similar way. And that's why Yeshayahu's predicament is so harsh. Because the people are so angry with God because God's not answering their prayers. Why is Ashur so successful? And that's why Yeshayahu has to explain over and over again, it's your behavior that God's angry with. And they don't get it until they're almost wiped out. Finally, they're saved at the last minute. But it has to be a miraculous victory. It can't be through their strength. They put all their effort in their own strength and their own building projects. God has to make the victory not military successful, but It has to be in a miraculous way when, remember, they hear Shmuan and he goes away. Remember, Yerushalayim saved at the last minute and wasn't destroyed. The king, what do you call it? The Syrian, there was a Shmuel, there's another battle going on somewhere else in a different front, and Sancheriv takes his army away and moves it somewhere else, and Jerusalem saved at the last minute. Now, it's hard for people to sing and be happy after all this because the country is destroyed. So Jerusalem was saved, but it's called a Pyrrhic victory. There, not much is left. And bottom line, during the time period of Yeshayahu, since Uziel till Chizkiyahu, the 10 tribes are gone, most of Judah is gone, and basically the first monarchy is destroyed. And it's going to take a long time to recover. Israel really never recovered shortly during the time of Yoshiel, but it's the beginning of the end. And the end of Beit Rishon is the end. Yeah, Bob, question?
Yeah, does Isaiah bring up this, like Yirmiyahu, about what happened with Shiloh, as far as remembering what happened?
Yeah, Yirmiyahu is saying Jerusalem will be saved. Micha says it'll be destroyed. But if I'm not mistaken, Yeshayahu doesn't warn against the destruction of the temple. He's telling the people that Ashur is going to be, you'll be defeated by Ashur, you're going to lose terrible battles, but God will protect the city. And in fact, when you get to Yirmiyahu, the reason why they think Yirmiyahu is a Navi Sheker is because even Micha, who predicted it would be destroyed, he was wrong. It wasn't destroyed. And because Yisrael never predicted its destruction, and Micha predicted it wasn't true, that proves that the temple can't be destroyed. And if a Navi decides that that temple can be destroyed, you're a Navi Sheker, they put Yirmiyahu on trial for that.
Okay.
That's all that we do when we get to Yirmiyahu. That makes Yirmiyahu so interesting.
Yeah.
All I want to try to explain to you is why Yeshayahu has such a rough career and why he has to be so poetic and so hard to understand. But what he's dealing with, and that's why the first parak is just his whole message. And the people just don't get it. Okay. Now, why are there so many Nevi'im? It's the most difficult time for Nevi'im to explain because no one understands God. You understand? The Havdil, like the Holocaust. What happened? How can you explain God? No matter what reason, no one will accept it. You can give every 1,000 reasons. How could God do something so terrible? How could Israel fall to such a thing? The only answer they can say is Hester Panim, which Isaiah will talk about in a totally different way. We'll see later on. Hester Panim means God hears you, but you're not worthy of his answering his prayer. Hester Panim isn't God not listening, but you're not worthy of God helping you. But it's all done. But there's so many Nevi'im now because the people are confused because most people understand religion as religion. I mean, prayer, sacrifice, ritual, and things like that. And no one sees the connection between a just society and honesty and kindness and thinking that's going to help. Everyone's got what they call ishtadlus. They have to, try this way, try that way, etc. Of course, you have to build up your walls of your city. But how you build your walls, he doesn't complain about the people fortifying the city. It's the unjust nature how they fortified the city. He's not complaining about doing the Shiloh project. He's saying you're putting all your hope in that and not doing. You have to defend yourself, but you have to make yourself worthy of God helping you as well. And that's the people just don't get. It's a fine balance between the two. Yirmiyahu isn't not even saying don't defend your city and don't have an army and don't protect yourself and don't do all these projects. He's saying don't do only that and put all your faith in that. And don't put all your faith in just in prayer and sacrifices. How you act with one another, how you behave, the society you build, that makes you worthy. And people just don't buy that. To this day, they don't buy that. But that's why there's so many Nevi'im, and that's why their message, they're all giving pretty much the same message in different ways. But that's what they're up to all the time. Now, as an introduction to I want to do that part with about the Bamot. We learned from Rav Shakeh how Bamot were understood or misunderstood. Then at the end, now why do we have this historical section? Because what's Yeshayahu been talking about up until now? Why Am Yisrael deserves to be punished, number one. Why God's allowing Ashur to come in. But how ultimately Israel will be saved. Sooner or later we'll be saved. We finally do have a good king. Chizkiyahu was a good king, but just not good enough. But ultimately we're saved. But we have to be saved in a miraculous way, not because of our military strength, but because God will do it in a miraculous way. Now, I need to prove that. And therefore, as an appendix to all these nevuot, I'm quoting 4 chapters from the style of Sefer Melachim to prove the point. Now, what's important for the next section, because what happens a lot in Nevi'im, I have Nevuot, and then I have like an historical appendix to prove the Navi's prediction came true. We'll find out later in Yirmiyahu as well. Yirmiyahu is going to have his Nevuot, and then there'll be an historical section, the story of the Churban, proving his Nevuot coming true. Now, that's going to be important for next week's share, because we have an historical appendix to the first 35 chapters of Yeshayahu, and chapter 40 starts a whole new ballgame, what they call Deutero-Isaiah. So next week, we have to explain the argument whether Deutero-Isaiah from chapter 40 to the end is the same prophet, talking about events that are going to happen 400 years from now, or is it a separate unit that was added onto Sefer? The Sefer Yeshayahu existed up until chapter 35, and then we have an historical appendix added to it to prove it, and then for some reason, Anshe Knesset Agdola, whoever later on, tacked on to Isaiah another book that doesn't have a name. No, it's like we had a book already, and we have like an appendix to Sefer Yeshayahu, which we call which is like almost half the book. But the question is, why am I taking Nevuot from the beginning of Bayit Sheni and attaching it to Nevuot that happened 200 years earlier? That's a challenge we have for next week, but now we'll get that background. The most interesting thing is the last chapter of chapter 39, where after this big first 37 and 38 talk about the Melach's victory against Ashur when they pick up and leave. And then after that victory is over, and Yeshayahu is supposed to, Yeshayahu tells Chizkiyahu, you're going to die, and then he prays, and then God gives him 15 more years. After that, Chizkiyahu accepts a visit of a Babylonian delegation coming to check out the city, but Chizkiyahu is trying to make a future alliance with Bavel. So just like he tried to make an alliance with Egypt beforehand, and that failed. Again, they're playing international politics, hoping, because their arch enemy is Ashur, if we team up with Bavel, they'll help us defeat Ashur. Yeshayahu sees this delegation from Bavel, and Chizkiyahu showing off his whole palace and talking nicely with them, like making new buddies, etc. And Yeshayahu yells at Chizkiyahu for making this treaty, for becoming friendly with them. And they have this sarcastic conversation between them. Yeshayahu tells him, you know what? Your friends, you think Bavel's going to help you? But right now, they're your friends. A time's going to come, they're going to wipe you out. It'll take a while. And Chizkiyahu tells him, well, at least it won't happen in my lifetime. You can see the tension between Chizkiyahu and Yeshayahu. Now, the Gemara in the end of 4th Parak in Pesachim talks about 3 things Chizkiyahu did that the rabbis agreed with, 3 things they didn't agree with. It's 3, you get 3 familiar, like the Yichon project, the Nachash Nachosh, all these different things. 3 they agreed, 3 they didn't agree. But what do you see from there? You see there's a tension between the king and the rabbis, between the kings and the Nevi'im. The king thinks he's doing the right thing, but in everything he does, the king's doing things that he thinks God would agree with. And some of the rabbis are telling him you're wrong, but he doesn't buy it. But we see this tension all the time between the king and the Navi. And when the king's so disappointed because God's not helping him the way he thought they'd be helping with him, people say we can do it on our own. We don't need you. It's a real serious problem, and it's really hard to navigate where you draw the line. Because on the one hand, you have to protect yourself, you have to have an army, you have to have international alliances, and you have to put your trust in God. How do you find the balance between them? So we know the different approaches. One is, the most important thing is your army and being strong and everyone doing the army and everyone, doing the effort. Others is just have to sit and learn all day and keep mitzvot, and God will protect you. Finding the balance between those 2 approaches is very difficult. All right? But bottom line, no matter which approach you follow, the key is how you act as God's people. You can have a legitimate argument between different groups, but how you argue, how you talk to one another, and making sure you prioritize your key values on top of the other ones. You can have a legitimate argument over, how much of a foreign policy how much do you depend on foreign powers for aid and things like that. But how you argue about it and what you do with it and what you do with your economy, that's more important than who you go to for aid and who you put your trust in. And again, not just trust that you believe that God can help you, it's understanding why God should help you and how you have to behave to be worthy of God's help. You have to believe that God can help, but you also have to believe that you have to be worthy of God's help. And that's going to be the and that'll explain all the difficulties of Isaiah's mixed message that he's giving all the time. That God will redeem you, but he's going to punish you. And where do you draw the line between God helping you and God punishing? Okay, we'll stop here for this week. But next week is the fun topic of Deutero Isaiah.
I just have a quick question. Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
What do you when you read these the poet, what do you call the poetic trucking? It's hard to believe that they were who they were directed to. Like people, like who was under who's he not? You can't see Yeshayahu going to and speaking to the people about that, and they understand what he's talking about. Like,
I'll show you something. I'll show you who he taught Hebrew to. when Chizkiyahu gets sick, I'm sorry. That's when he gives us in 38. He gets sick. That's when he here. And Yeshayahu comes and tells him, tell you you're dying tomorrow. Give your last word and testament to your kids. Write your will. Chizkiyahu turns around and davens, right? And he says, look what I did for you. See the word that's from Brit Milah. And Chizkiyahu cried. That's like really good davening. And Yeshayahu tells him, what do you call it? God heard your cry. He's giving you 50 more years. And I'll save it for Melech Ashur. And here's the sign. He goes back to the story of Achaz, which we don't have to go back into with the Achaz didn't want to sign. Here he gets the sign back. Now, here's a michtav of Chizkiyahu, okay, when he got sick, okay? And then he starts giving his prayer. And read his prayer, and you see where he got his Hebrew from, okay? Look at his Hebrew. His Hebrew is so beautiful in his prayer. But you see his style, it's not exactly Isaiah's, but it's very similar. Amati yaber sachem lo abit adam od im yoshvei chadel. Dori nisab nigla mini v'roi kiparati korei chayai midala yivatzeni biyom ad laila tashlimeni shiviti ad boker karich. And it's hard to understand all this poetry. But you see, you ask, who's he talking to? You can see that Chizkiyahu knew his language.
Right.
And learned how to talk from him. People, that was the... Again, it's like when we read Shakespeare's English, it's hard to understand. But I'm assuming in the time of Shakespeare, people understood Shakespeare's English. Maybe, I'm not sure. We don't. I'm sure he was like, high level Hebrew, but I'm assuming some people understood his English back then. So I'm assuming.
Can I ask about
there's no Navi that talks so poetic than Isaiah does. Yeah, Moshe?
Sorry. The nevuos about Asher Bavel, were those said to those people? Did they know it? I saw one of the Farshim saying like it was 100 years ahead of time or something Bavel.
Listen, a lot of people say Masab Bavel is really talking about Ashur, but he can't say Ashur publicly because Ashur is our enemy. So right. He hides at Bavel, but it only means Ashur. That's the classic approach on that one. Because at the end, he talks about Ashur falling. And Bavel and Ashur get intertwined many times in Tanakh because it's the same area.
Even though it's many years apart.
The best share on the topic, Neri Klein share that he gave for the Hebrew Nache, he did this whole topic beautifully about why are these nevuot. In general, most of these nevuot are for Am Yisrael. They're not for those nations. They're nevuot. Yirmiyahu gives nevuot for other nations. That's the topic in Yirmiyahu. But Yeshayahu's nevuot are what Am Yisrael wants to hear about the fall of all their enemies. I just want you can hear it nowadays, the same idea, where the people are just eager to hear about God punishing and punishing of all of our enemies. We want this one, we want Iran to fall, I'm saying, it's good, not against it. But that's all they want to hear. What they don't want to hear is how we have to behave to be worthy of that. But so when people only want to hear what they want to hear and not listening to what they need to hear, so that's why all these mas'ot are talking about the fall of our enemies. And then he hides in the middle of it, this Lasagi Chizayon, to make his point. But at the end of all these ones, something good will happen to Israel if we're worthy. So, because when you give a message of destruction, you have to give a little drop of hope that there'll be recovery when it's over. But those all the masot follow that pattern. They're always something, the fall of an enemy, but something good for us at the end. And that's what people want to hear. And they get so trained by it that when we get to Yirmiyahu's time, they're only hearing masot about the fall of the nations. They're not listening to what they need to do better. And God says, no more masot. No more masot. Those days are over.
I had a question.
Sure.
You mentioned like the miracle that happened on Pesach Eve when the Assyrian army,
Yeah.
185,000 men,
Yeah.
that they left. Did they leave or did they die? What's the
So it's really cool. The in Assyrian records, he talks about his conquest of Judea. He says there, what did I do? I surrounded Jerusalem. I surrounded Jerusalem like a cage, right? Like birds in a cage. I left them alone. But they admit that they left. That they surround Jerusalem and they left. They don't say how they left and why they left. But he said, Jerusalem. I surrounded it. We didn't need to waste our time copying the city. Yeah, we have them. We have them surrounded. We didn't need to do anymore. But the outside sources match yeah. There's so much correlation between Assyrian historical documents and the story in Isaiah, which are like amazing. At this look at the wall relief, the Battle of Lachish. That's the wall relief, and it's now in the British Museum. But you see what Jews look like. You see what they look like. You see Jews bringing presents. You see Jews being swung on catapults, to the enemy. You have to look at it's all online also, you can see it. But it was if that's what Sancheriv used to decorate his palace, that shows you how great a victory it was and how big a city Lachish was. But shows you how powerful Israel was. We were a superpower under Uziel. We were great. And no one could believe it's going to fall apart. That was the thing. Yeah, Benji?
so did they leave or did the 185,000 did they die, which is what
They say they left. Yeah.
okay.
Everyone writes their history the way they want to read it. That makes sense.
Okay.
Benji.
Okay. The Surah Mordach Baladin ben Baladin. The onus was because the etzem of
By the way, notice the name of the kings, the Babylonian kings, their name's Mordach. Mordach, like Mordechai. It's Marduk.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So the onus was because of the alliance itself, or because he showed him the Nechos or Beit Nechos or whatever.
It seems like from his rebuke, he's saying, "Here you go again. You put your alliance with Egypt, it didn't help you. Now you're trying us short. You're trying just quit the politics." He's saying,
was he punished for showing him his wealth?
No. I don't think he's punished for showing the wealth. He was punishing him for putting his trust for. I think he's showing his wealth because that's how you want to make. When you have a foreign visitor, you want to. Let's say you're coming. Let's say some prime minister of another country comes to Washington to try to get military aid. So you have to show off, and everyone's got to show how great they are. And kings like to hear how great they are to one another, and like to show off how they're off, and that usually leads to a military help. I don't think that applies nowadays, but maybe back then it was a consideration. And the rabbis, it seems like Isaiah doesn't like this idea of another treaty again. But Chizkiel, because they failed so terribly against Ashur, when he tells them one day Bavel's going to come and punish you, what's Chizkiel say? Well, it won't be in my lifetime, so I don't care. There's tension between them. Do you see beforehand? Remember, Isaiah says you're going to die. He says I'm going to daven. But the prophet isn't always right all the time.
What were you saying with Merodach Mordechai? Can you repeat that?
All the Babylonian kings have there's Evel Merodach, Mordach Baladan. Mordach is always most kings have the name of their god and they names the king. Like we have Yud Hey in all of our kings' names, Yeshayahu, Uziyahu, Achaziyahu. Remember, God's name goes with the king. So their name, the god of Bavel is Marduk. He's the big Babylonian king. He's the king that allowed Koresh. It's in the Cyrus cylinder as well. But the big Babylonian king is Marduk. And it's not by chance that no one's named Mordechai by Rishon, but Mordechai is not just a goyish name in the beginning by Sheni. It's the name of another god, which shows how it's like calling a Jew nowadays Christopher or Luke or something like that. But he could be a from Jew, but his parents called him Christopher.
If he was part of Sanhedrin with a name like Christopher, it's interesting, no?
Yeah, I mean, what do you call it? Antigua. Yeah, look at all the people in the Sanhedrin who had Greek names. Look in Pirkei Avot. In the early Hellenistic times, they have all Greek names. They call the Sanhedrin's a Greek name. You can be immersed in Western culture and still be from.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. I didn't think of that. Thank you very much.
Okay, sir. Have
Thank
a
you
good
very
week,
much.
everybody, and we can hope for we should hope like a miracle like Yeshayahu had at the end, like Chizkiyahu had nowadays. We could use one
Please
like that,
God. Baruch
and
Hashem.
we should be worthy of it. Okay.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Shvuah Tov.
Thank you.
Close the stop recording, and